Hi guys! So I wanted to get us started with chapter 5 of Mice and Men today. I've already posted the question set for this and it will be live by the time that this video goes live. I also wanted to make you aware that I have in fact posted the Of Mice and Men prompt too, and that has been placed here. It deals with the end of the novel, and then I also have chapter 6 questions going out tomorrow at 8 a.m. or no, Wednesday at 8 a.m. after we've read it. Once I get the video out tomorrow, I'm actually going to post those, so they'll get posted sooner than that. All right, I also received most of your Of Mice and Men chapter 4 questions, so please know that I am going to be working through those pretty soon. And then I'm still planning on your Of Mice and Men essay to be on Friday, and then I'm hoping we can do a movie night through Google Hangouts on Thursday where I'll stream the movie. I know that's probably not okay, but it is what it is. I don't want to make you guys buy the movie. All right, so I just wanted to get us started. I've got my mug today, which says I'm a star baker. And then I've also got Miss Maggie Moo over here. She's keeping me company during this really weird time. All right. So you are welcome to open up those questions once they get posted to read along with me. This chapter is not long. We're only about 30 pages from the end at this point, so it won't take me a long time to finish this chapter. I'm hoping to make it through the whole thing by the end of that video. I am going to try to keep all of our videos to about 20 minutes. I'm actually going to start that timer now. All right, and let's get going. All right, so the last chapter we left off in was chapter 4 with Crooks and his loneliness, and that's a reoccurring theme. It's actually a motif, a new word for you, and it's something where we see the same theme come up over and over and over again, and loneliness is a big part of that. Curly is lonely. His wife is lonely. Candy is lonely. George and Lenny are not lonely. They have each other. And Crooks is lonely as well. And so we want to keep that in mind as we head into this next one, because I think it's going to make some of the next part make sense. All right, so I'm going to pull up the text on here. And so now I have it in front of me. You'll see my little cursor kind of floating around. I tried to make it really bright so that you could see it. So that way when I point to something in the text, you'll be able to see where I'm pointing to. All right, I'm going to move it over here to the right side for now, but we're going to get started. So on the end of the grape barn was piled high with new hay, and over the pile hung the 4-taloned Jackson fork suspended from its pulley. The hay came down like a mountain slope to the other end of the barn, and there was a level place as yet unfilled with new crop. And at the sides of the feeding racks were visible, and between the slats the heads of horses could be seen. It was a Sunday afternoon, and the resting horses nibbled at the remaining wisps of hay, and they stamped their feet, and they bit the wood of the mangers and rattled their halter chains, and the afternoon sun sliced in through the cracks of the barn walls, and lazy in the bright lines of the hay. There was the buzz of flies in the air, the lazy afternoon humming. And from outside came the clang of horseshoes on the playing peg, and the shouts of men playing, encouraging, jeering. But in the barn it was quiet, and humming, and lazy, and warm. Only Lenny was in the barn, and Lenny sat in the hay beside a packing case under the manger in the end of the barn that had not been filled with hay. Lenny sat in the hay and looked at the little dead puppy that lay in front of him. Sorry, I wanted to make sure I was recording. We're on page 84. Lenny sat in the hay and looked at the little dead puppy that lay in front of him. And Lenny looked at it for a long time, and then he put out his huge hand and stroked it clear from one end to the other. And Lenny said softly to the puppy, "Why you gotta get killed? You ain't so little as mice. I didn't bounce you hard." And he bent the puppy's head up and looked it in its face, and he said to it, "Now maybe George ain't gonna let me tend no rabbits if he finds out I got you killed." And he scooped up a little hollow and laid the puppy in it and then covered it with his hay and out of sight. But he continued to stare at the mound that he had made. He said, "This ain't no bad thing like I gotta go hide in the brush. Oh no, this ain't. I'll tell George that I found it dead." Okay, so Lenny is capable of lying. He is capable of being dishonest, but I don't think that's a huge holdup here. He says, he unburied it, the puppy, and inspected it, and he stroked it from ears to tail, and he went on sorrowfully, "But he'll know. George always knows. He'll say, 'You done it. Don't try to pull nothing over on me.' And he'll say, 'And now just for that, you don't get to tend no rabbits.'" And suddenly his anger rose. "God damn you," he cried. "Why you gotta get killed? You ain't so little as mice." And he picked up the pup and hurled it from him. He turned his back on it. He sat bent over his knees, and he whispered, "Now I won't get to tend the rabbits. Now he won't let me." He rocked himself back and forth in his sorrow. All right. You can definitely find in what I've just read, you can find answers for number 1, right? Just so you're aware. And from outside came the clang of horseshoes on the iron stake, and then a little chorus of cries, and Lenny got up and brought the puppy back and laid it on the hay and sat down, and he stroked the puppy again. He wasn't big enough, he said. They told me that you wasn't. I didn't know you'd get killed so easy. He worked his fingers on the pup's limp ear. Maybe George won't care, he said. This here goddamn little son of a bitch was nothing to George. Curly's wife came around the corner at the end of the stall, and she came very quietly so that Lenny didn't see her. She wore her bright cotton dress and her mules with red ostrich feathers, and her face was made up with little sausage curls that were all in place, and she was quite near to him before Lenny looked up and saw her. And in a panic, he shoveled hay over the puppy with his fingers, and he looked sullenly up at her, and she said, "What you got there, sonny boy?" Well, Lenny glared at her. "George says I ain't to have nothing to do with you. Talk to you or nothing." And she left. "George give you orders about everything." And Lenny looked down at the hay. "Says I can't tend no rabbits if I talk to you or anything." "Well," she said quietly, "he's scared Curly'll get mad." Well, Curly got his arm in singing, "And if Curly gets tough, you can break his other hand. You didn't put nothing over on me getting it caught in no machine." But Lenny was not to be drawn. "No, sir, I ain't going to talk to you or nothing." And she knelt in the hay beside him. "Listen," she said, "all the other guys got a horseshoe tenement going on. It's only about 4 o'clock and none of them guys is going to leave that tenement. Why can't I talk to you? I never get to talk to nobody. I get awfully lonely." There's that loneliness again. And Lenny said, "Well, I ain't supposed to talk to you or nothing. I get lonely," she said. "You can't talk to people, you can talk to people, but I can't talk to nobody but Curly, else he gets mad. How do you like not to talk to anybody?" And Lenny said, "Well, I ain't supposed to. George's scared I'll get in trouble." She changed up the subject. "What do you got covered up over there?" And then all of a sudden, all of Lenny's woe came back on him, and he just said, "Just my puppy," said Sally. "Just my little pup." And he swept the hay from on top of it. "Why, he's dead," she cried. "He was so little," said Lenny. "I was just playing with him, and he made like he was going to bite me, and I made like I was going to smack him, and then I done it, and then he was dead." She consoled him. "Don't you worry, Ned. He's just a mutt. You can get another one easy. The whole county's full of mutts." "It ain't that so much," Lenny explained. "George ain't going to let me tend no rabbits now." "Well, why don't he?" "Well, he said if I done one more bad thing, he ain't going to let me tend the rabbits." So she moved closer to him and spoke soothingly. "Don't you worry about talking to me. Listen to the guys yell out there. They got $4 betting that tenement. None of them ain't going to leave till it's over." "If George sees me talking to you, he'll give me house," said Lenny cautiously. "He told me so." And her face grew angry. "What's the matter with me?" she cried. "Ain't I got a right to talk to nobody? What do they think I am anyways? You're a nice guy. I don't know why I can't talk to you. I ain't done you no harm." "Well, George said you'll get us in a mess." "Aw, nuts," she said. "What kind of harm am I doing to you? Seems like there ain't none of them that cares how I gotta live. I tell you, I ain't used to living like this. I could have made something of myself," she said directly. "Maybe I will yet." And then her words tumbled out in a passion of communication as she hurried before her listener could be taken away. "I lived right here in Salinas," she said. "Come there when I was a kid. And now, well, a show come through it once, and I met the actors, and he says I could go with the show, but my old lady wouldn't let me. She says because I was only 15. But the guy says I could have, and if I would have went, I wouldn't be living like this, you bet." Well, Lenny stroked the pup back and forth. "We're going to get a little place and rabbits," he explained. He went on with her story quickly before she could interrupt. "Another time I met a guy, and he was in the pictures, and went out to the Riverside Dance Palace with him, and he says he was going to put me in the movies. He says I was a natural. As soon as he got back to Hollywood, he was going to write me about it." She looked closely at Lenny to see whether she was impressing him. "I never got that letter," she said. "I always thought my old lady stole it. Well, I wasn't going to stay in a place like that, where I couldn't get nowhere nor make something of myself, and where they stole your letters. I asked her if she stole it, and she says no, so I married Curly. Met him out of the Riverside Dance Palace the same night I met him." She demanded. "You listening?" "Me? Sure. All right, so we're heading into question number 2. Well, we're at question, and I'm going to continue reading question number 2. "Well, I ain't told this to nobody before. Maybe I oughtn't to. I don't like Curly. He ain't a nice fella." And because she had confided in him, she moved closer to Lenny, and he sat beside him. Could have been the movies, had nice clothes, had all the nice clothes like they wear, and I could have sat in them big hotels and had pictures took of me. And when they had them previews, I would have went to them and spoke in the radio, and it would have cost me a cent because I was in the picture, and all them nice clothes like they wear because the guy says I was a natural. She looked up at Lenny, made a small, grand gesture with her arms to show that she could act. And the fingers trailed after her, leading her wrist, and her little finger stuck out grandly from the rest, and Lenny sighed deeply, and from outside came the clang of horseshoes on metal, and then a chorus of cheers. Somebody made a ringer, said Curly's wife. Now the light was lifting as the sun went down, and the sun streaks climbed up the wall and fell over the feeding racks and over the heads of the horses. And Lenny said, maybe if I took this pup out and throwed him away, George would never know, and then I could tend the rabbits without no trouble. And Curly's wife said angrily, don't you think about nothing but rabbits? We're going to have a little place, Lenny explained. We're going to have a house and a garden and a place for alfalfa. That is for the rabbits. And I take a sack and I get it full of alfalfa and then I take it to the rabbits. And she says, what makes you so nuts about rabbits? And Lenny had to think carefully before he could come to a conclusion, and he moved cautiously close to her until he was right against her. I like to pet nice things. Once at a fair, I seen some of them long-hair rabbits, and they was nice, you bet. Sometimes I even pet mice, but not when I could get nothing better. And Curly's wife moved away from him a little. I think you're nuts, she said. No, I ain't, Lenny explained earnestly. George says I ain't. I like to pet nice things with my fingers. She was a little reassured. Well, who don't? She said. Everybody likes that. I like to feel silk and velvet. Do you like the feel of velvet? And Lenny chuckled with pleasure. You bet, by God, he cried happily. And I had some, too. A lady gave me some. And that lady was my own Aunt Clara, and she gave it right to me about this big a piece. I wish I had the velvet right now. And a frown came over his face. I lost it, he said. I ain't seen it for a long time. Curly's wife laughed at him. You're nuts, she said, but you're kind of a nice fella, just like a big baby. But a person can kind of see what you mean. When I'm doing my hair, sometimes I'll just sit there and stroke it because it's so soft. To show how she did it, she ran her fingers over the top of her head. Some people got real kind of coarse hair, she said complacently. Take Curly, his hair's just like wire, but mine's soft and fine because I brush it a lot. That makes it fine. Here, feel right here. And then she took Lenny's hand and put it on her head and feel right there around to see how soft it is. And Lenny's big fingers fell just stroking her. Now don't you mess it up, she said. And Lenny said, oh, that's nice, he said, stroking. Oh, that's nice. Look out now, you'll mess it up. And then she cried angrily, now stop it, you'll mess it up. And she jerked her head sideways and Lenny's fingers closed on her hair and hung on. Let go, she cried, let go. And Lenny was in a panic. His face was contorted. She screamed then, and Lenny's other hand closed over her mouth and nose and says, please don't, he begged. Oh, please don't do that. George will be mad. And she struggled violently under his hands. Her feet battered on the hay, and she writhed to be free, and from under Lenny's hand came a muffled screaming, and Lenny began to cry with fright. Oh, please don't do none of that, he begged. George's gonna say I done a bad thing. He ain't gonna let me tend no rabbits. And he moved his hand a little, and her hoarse cry came out, and then Lenny grew angry. Now don't, he said. I don't want you to yell. You're gonna get me in trouble, just like George says you will. Now don't do that. And she continued to struggle, and her eyes were wild with terror, and he shook her, and he was angry with her. Don't you go yelling, he said, and he shook her, and her body flopped like a fish. And then she was still, for her Lenny had broken her neck. He looked down at her, and carefully he removed his hand from over her mouth and lay still. I don't want to hurt you, he said, but George will be mad if you yell. And when she didn't answer in a move, he bent closely over her, and he lifted her arm and let it drop, and for a moment he seemed bewildered, and then he whispered in a fright, I done a bad thing. I done another bad thing. He pawed up the hay until it partly covered her. From outside the barn came a cry of men and the double clang of horseshoes on metal, and for the first time Lenny came conscious of the outside. He crouched down in the hay and listened. I done a real bad thing, he said. I shouldn't have did that. George will be mad. And he said, and hide in the brush till he come. And he was going to be mad and in the brush till he come. And that's what he said. And then he went back and looked at the dead girl. The puppy lay close to her, and Lenny picked it up. I'll throw him away, she said. It's bad enough like that. He said, it's bad enough like this. And he put a pup under his coat and crept out of the barn wall and peered between the cracks towards the horseshoe game. And then he crept around the end of the last manger and disappeared. All right. So you can definitely answer number 3 and number 4 here. And then number 5, if you've picked up on it, you're welcome to do that. It's good to finish the chapter, and I'm gonna finish it for you, but just so you know, you will have been able to answer all questions by now. It was very quiet in the barn. Oh, the sun streaks were high on the wall by now, and the light was growing soft in the barn, and Curly's wife lay on her back. She was half covered in hay. It was very quiet in the barn, and the quiet of the afternoon was on the ranch, and even the clang of the pitches and the shoes, even the voices of the men in the game seemed to grow more quiet. The air in the barn was dusky in advance of the outside day, and a pigeon flew in through the open haywood door, and circled and flew out again. Around the last stall came a shepherd bitch, lean and long with heavy hanging dugs, and halfway to the packing box where the puppies lay, she caught the dead scent of Curly's wife, and the hair rose along her spine. She whimpered and cringed to the packing box and jumped in among the puppies. Curly's wife lay in a half covering of yellow hay, and the meanness of the plantings and the discontent and the ache for attention were all gone from her face. She was pretty, simple. Her face was sweet and young. Now her rouged cheeks and reddened lips made her seem alive and sleeping very lightly. The curls, tiny little sausages, were spread on the hay behind her head, and her lips were parted. As happened sometimes, a moment settled and hovered and remained for much more than a moment. The sound stopped and the movement stopped for much, much more than a moment. And then gradually time awakened again and moved sluggishly on. The horses stamped on the other side of the feeding racks, and the halter chains clinked, and outside the men's voices became louder and clearer, and from round the end of the last stall, old Candy's voice came. "Lenny," he called. "Oh, Lenny, you in here? I was figuring some more. Tell you what we can do, Lenny." Old Candy appeared around the end of the last stall. "Oh, Lenny," he called again, and then he stopped, and his body stiffened, and he rubbed his smooth wrist on his white, stubbly whiskers. "I didn't know you was here," he said to Curly's wife. When she didn't answer, he stepped near. "You hadn't sleep out here," he said disapprovingly, and then he was beside her. "Oh, Jesus Christ." He looked about helplessly, and he rubbed his beard, and then he jumped up and went quickly out of the barn. But the barn was alive now. The horses stamped and snorted, and they chewed their straw and of their bedding, and they clashed the chains of their halters, and in a moment Candy came back, and George was with them. And George said, "What was it you wanted to see me about?" And Candy pointed to Curly's wife, and George stared. "What's the matter with her?" he asked. He stepped closer and then echoed Candy's words. "Oh, Jesus Christ." He was down on his knees beside her, and he put his hand over her heart, and finally, when he stood up slowly and stiffly, his face was as hard and as tight as wood, and his eyes were hard. And Candy said, "What done it?" And George looked coldly at him. "Hey, you got any idea?" he asked, and then Candy said, "I should have knew." George said hopelessly, "I guess maybe way in the back of my head I did." Candy asked, "What are we going to do now, George? What are we going to do now?" And George was a long time in answering, and he said, "Guess we got to tell the guys. I guess we got to get him and lock him up. We can't let him get away. Why, the poor bastard will starve. Maybe they'll lock him up and be nice to him." But Candy said excitedly, "We ought to let him run away. You don't know Curly. Curly's going to get him lynched. Curly will get him killed." And George watched Candy's lip. "Yeah," he said at last. "That's right. Curly will. And the other guys will." And he looked at Curly's wife. Now Candy spoke his greatest fear. "You and me can get that little place, can't we, George? You and me, we can go live nice, can't we, George? Can't we?" But before George could answer, Candy dropped his head and looked down at the hay, because he knew. And George said softly, "I think I knowed from the very first. I think I knowed we'd never do her. We used to hear about it so much I got to thinking maybe we would." "Then it's all off," Candy asked slowly. George didn't answer his question. George said, "I'll work my month, and I'll take my $50, and I'll stay some night in a lousy cat house. Or I'll set in some pool room till everyone goes home, and then I'll come back and work another month, and I'll have $50 more." And Candy said, "He's such a nice fellow, I didn't think he'd do nothing like this." And George still stared at Curly's wife. "Lenny never done it in meanness," he said. "All the time he's done bad things, he'd never done one of them mean." He straightened up and looked back at Candy. "Now listen. We gotta tell the guys. They gotta bring him in, I guess. There ain't no way out. Maybe they won't hurt him," he said sharply. "I ain't gonna let him hurt Lenny, but now you listen. The guys might think I was in on it. I'm gonna go in the bunkhouse, and then in a minute you come out and tell the guys about her, and I'll come along and maybe like I never seen her. And will you do that? So the guys won't think I was in on it?" And Candy said, "Well, sure, George. Sure, I can do that." "Okay, give me a couple of minutes then. And you come running out and tell just like you found her. I'm going now." George turned and went quietly out of the barn. Old Candy watched him go. He looked helplessly back at Curly's wife, and gradually his sorrow and his anger grew into words. "You goddamn tramp," he said viciously. "You done it, didn't you? I suppose you're glad. Everybody know you'd mess things up. You wasn't no good. You ain't no good now, you lousy tart." And he sniveled and his voice shook. "I could have hoed them garden and washed dishes for them." He paused and then went on this hissing song, and he repeated the words. "If they went to a circus or a baseball game, we would have went to her, and just to say the hell with work, and went to her, and never asked anybody. And they'd been pigs and chickens, and in the winter, the fat little stove, and the rain coming out, and just sitting there." His eyes were blinded with tears. And he turned and went weakly out the barn, and he rubbed his bristly whiskers with his wrist stump. and outside the noise of the game stopped. There was a rise of voices and question, a drum of running feet, and the men burst into the barn. Slim and Carlson and young Whit and Curly and Crooks came in and keeping back out of range. Candy came after them, and last of all came George, and George had on his blue denim coat and buttoned it, and his black hat pulled down over his eyes, and the men raced around the last stall. Their eyes found Curly's wife in gloom, and they stopped and stood and looked at her. Then Slim went quietly over to her, and he felt her wrist, and one lean finger touched her cheek, and then his hand went under her slightly twisted neck, and his fingers explored her neck. And when he stood up, the men crowded near, and the spell was broken, and Curly came suddenly to life. "I know who done it," he said. He cried. "That big son of a bitch done it. I know he done it. Why, everybody else was out there playing horseshoes." He worked himself into a fury. "I'm going to get him. I'm going to get my shotgun. I'll kill that big son of a bitch myself. I'm going to shoot him in the guts. Come on, you guys." And he ran furiously out of the barn, and Carlson said, "I'll get my Luger," and he ran out too. And Slim turned quietly to George. "I guess Lenny could have done it all right," he said. "Her neck's bust." Lenny could have done that. Well, George didn't answer, but he nodded slowly. His hat was far covered over his forehead, and his eyes were covered. And Slim went on, "Maybe like that time in Weed you was telling about." And again, George nodded, and Slim sighed. "Well, I guess we gotta go get him. Where do you think he might have went?" It seemed to take George some time to free his words. "He would have went south," he said. "We come from the north, so he would have went south." "I guess we gotta get him," Slim repeated. And George stepped close. "Couldn't we maybe bring him in and lock him up? He's nuts, Slim. He never done any of it to be mean." And Slim nodded. "We might. If we could keep Curly in, we might. But Curly's going to want to shoot him. And Curly's still mad about his hand. And suppose they lock him up and strap him down and put him in a cage. That ain't no good, George." "I know," said George. "I know." Carlson came running in. "That bastard stole my Luger," he shouted. "It ain't my bag." Curly followed, and Curly carried a shotgun in his good hand. Curly was cold now. "All right, you guys," he said. "The nigger's got a shotgun. You can take it, Carlson. When you see him, don't give him no chance. Shoot for his guts. That'll double him over." And Whit said excitedly, "I ain't got a gun." And Curly said, "Well, you go to Soledad and get a cop. Get Al Wiltz. He's the deputy sheriff. Let's go now," he said. "You're coming with this fella." "Yeah," said George, "I'll come. But listen, Curly, the poor bastard's nuts. Don't shoot him. He didn't know what he was doing." "Don't shoot him," Curly cried. He got to Carlson's Luger. "Of course we're going to shoot him." And George said weakly, "Maybe Carlson lost his gun." "Well, I seen it this morning," said Carlson. "No, it's been took." Slim stood looking down at Curly's wife. He said, "Curly, maybe you better stay here with your wife." Curly's face reddened. "I'm going," he said. "I'm going to shoot the guts out of that big bastard myself. Even if I only got one hand, I'm going to shoot. I'm going to get him." Slim turned to Candy. "You better stay here with her then, Candy. The rest of us are going to get going." They moved away, and George stopped for a moment beside Candy, and they both looked down at the dead girl until Curly called, "You, George, you stick with us so we don't think you had nothing to do with this." George moved heavily after them, and his feet dragged heavily. And when they were gone, Candy squatted down in the hay and watched the face of Curly's wife. "Poor bastard," he said softly. The sound of the men grew fainter. The barn was darkening gradually, and in their stalls the horses shifted their feet and rattled their halter chains. Old Candy lay down in the hay and covered his eyes with his arm. All right, big chapter, big chapter, and so let's talk a little bit kind of with the last couple minutes that I have that I want to make sure I get everything covered. So the beginning of the plot, or the beginning of this chapter, we see the death of the puppy, and ultimately it is a huge piece of foreshadowing at the end of this chapter as well. The moment with Lenny and his wife and Curly's wife just gets so out of hand so quickly, and I agree with Slim here. I don't think Lenny did it in meanness, but I think he's so focused on this idea of the rabbits and this life that they're going to make happen that to him everything else is secondary. So I'm curious what you will think of the end of our novel as we head into it tomorrow. I am looking to maybe start a Discord channel where you can pop in and get help, or send me a message, or we can even do chats. So let me know what you might think of something like that. You're welcome to leave a comment on this video, send me a text, or even email me. All right. I look forward to finishing this novel with you guys tomorrow. Have a good day.